All right, so John Adams was became president in 1797. Was president from 1797 to 1801. Now, of course, the election was 70. I'm sorry, 96. Did I say 1797 or 77? Yeah, okay, I think I said it right. 1797 to 1801, and the presidential election, of course, was 1796. Okay, and it was between John Adams, who was a Federalist, and Thomas Jefferson, who was a Democratic Republican. And the way they did it back then was it went to the Electoral College, as you know. And today, we still use the Electoral College. The way it works today is that Louisiana, for example, the great state of Louisiana. I'm in Texas right now, so I wish I was back over there eating some rice and gravy. All right. Anyway, pork roast, preferably. Anyway, Louisiana has 9 electoral votes. So if in the next election a nominee wins Louisiana, then they get 9 of Louisiana's electors. So if you go, here's a presidential candidate, here's a presidential candidate. When you go and you vote, they will have 9 names under this person and 9 names under this person. Okay? And so when you vote for that person, you're not really voting for the candidate, you're voting for these electors to vote for this person in the Electoral College. And that is why you can actually win the popular vote, like Al Gore did in 2000, and lose the election. All right? Because the way it adds up, it's kind of winner take all. It's only a few states that kind of have like a proportional deal arrangement. So if you can win a state by 1 vote, but you'd get all the electoral votes. So the way it adds up, you could actually win the Electoral College, but lose the popular vote, or win the popular vote and lose the Electoral College. Well, back in the 1790s, it wasn't that way. In the 1790s, it was just the Electoral College. And people would write names on a ballot, and whoever got the most names, who came in first, won, and who came in second became the vice president. And so in this case, Adams got the most votes, and Thomas Jefferson got the second most votes. And so therefore, Jefferson, who was a Democratic Republican, became the vice president, and Adams, who was a Federalist, became the president. So you had a president and vice president of different political parties. So that's interesting. Some people say that they wish they would go back to that because in if the let's say for example a president wins by 51% of the vote, and so that means 49% went to the other person, or 48, because there may be 1% that went, somewhere else or whatever. Well, this 48% or 49% is substantial. All right, it's a minority, and in a democracy, the majority rules. But remember, in a democracy, you have to have account for what they call majority tyranny. In other words, the minority needs to have some say so. And so some people say that in the executive branch, they have that in Congress, in the House and the Senate, but in the executive branch, you don't have that. Okay, and so by doing it this way, you would have that, but that's never going to happen, so don't worry about it. Now, what about Adams' administration? Well, the first Adams was kind of one of these guys that you he was very peculiar. Okay, very smart guy, but a little different. He'd be the kind of person that when you'd walk down the street, and if you were to see him, you'd say, "How you doing, Mr. Adams?" And then in his journal that night, he would say, "Well, so and so asked me how I was doing today. I wonder what he meant by that." So he was a little odd or whatever. Well, when Adams um, became president, um, he tried to smooth relations with France. France was upset with the United States because the United States had made overtures towards Great Britain. For example, the Jay's Treaty, which I didn't go over. You can find it in the book. There's really not a whole lot to it, just kind of clearing some things up after the Revolution. But basically, overtures to try to smooth out relations between Great Britain and the United States. France didn't like this. France actually started seizing some of America's ships. Adams sent some diplomats over there, Charles C. Pinckney, John Marshall, Elbridge Gerry, you don't have to remember that, to negotiate. And when he went there, they basically tried to bribe the Americans, and was basically like, okay, you give us um, we'll negotiate with you, we'll talk to you if you give us a certain amount of money, a few $1,000,000. Okay, and so Americans are not going to go for that. I mean, everybody was upset. Americans were outraged, and a famous banquet toast um, uh, I think it was in Washington. This guy said, "Millions for defense, but not 1 cent for tribute." All right, well, that has caused all kinds of outrage, and there actually began kind of this undeclared naval war between the United States and France, mainly in the Mediterranean and the Indian Ocean, places like that. At Adams' urging, a fleet of 33 warships was constructed by 1799. So the United States didn't mess around here. A 10,000-man army was raised and placed under the ostensible control of Washington, though his health was poor, that Alexander Hamilton really, in effect, took control. Now, unfortunately, what this led to is something that was called the Alien and Sedition Acts. Now, part of what was called the Alien Acts was what was known as the Naturalization Act, which made it much more difficult for people to become citizens. I think before you had to, it was like 5 years, and they upped it to 14 years. This was mainly political because many of the people that were immigrants coming to the United States were Democratic Republicans, and the Federalists wanted to make it, delay their time before they could start voting. They consider these dangerous aliens. Also, the Alien Act, part of the Alien, the Naturalization Act was part of the Alien Act, and there was another act that stated that the president could deport anyone that he thought was that was not a citizen, that he thought any alien that was any person that was here was not yet a citizen. He felt that if he thought they were dangerous, he could deport them. In other words, you have to go back to your country. And the Sedition Act stated that a person could be held liable for any false, scandalous, or malicious spoken or written word against the government, which kind of sounds like it's a violation of the First Amendment to me. Although there's some historians that actually argue that that's not the case. Okay, when that occurred, something very interesting happened. Okay, which was the Virginia and Kentucky resolutions, which basically stated that if Virginia and Kentucky wanted to nullify these laws that they thought were unconstitutional, that they could. And this is actually this theory of nullification, you might say, is one of the things. It was the first glimpse, the first glimpse at the beginnings of the Civil War. Now remember, the U.S. Civil War was from 1861 to 65. And again, it was like state rights versus the power of the federal government. Okay, and how powerful the federal government would become, what the states could do and could not do. And honestly, you can look at the Constitution and interpret it either way. Okay, and so basically, they thought the Sedition Acts, the Alien and Sedition Acts, were unconstitutional, and they were just sort of not going to enforce them. All right, so the theory of nullification. Whoops, I didn't mean to do that. Now, Adams did not win the election of 1800. Thomas Jefferson did, and Jefferson served 2 terms. And one of the most important things that Jefferson did during his election, or I'm sorry, during his presidency, was the Louisiana Purchase. And we will talk about the Louisiana Purchase in our next lecture.